June 12th was supposed to be the best day for the rest of my life. I woke up that morning with a lightness in my chest, the kind that comes only after years of grinding sacrifice that finally bears fruit. For nearly a decade, I had lived frugally, taking on late-night freelance projects, eating instant noodles more times than I care to admit, and skipping vacations while everyone else posted beach photos. Every dollar I saved was for one goal, a home of my own. 2 days earlier, that dream had finally materialized in the form of a charming craftsman-style house. It wasn't extravagant, but to me it was perfect. A porch swing that creaked softly in the breeze, a wide kitchen with sun-drenched windows, and a backyard that I'd already envisioned transforming into a lush garden. I had stayed up past midnight sketching little diagrams of where the roses and herbs would go. For once, I felt like my life was on steady ground. That morning, I was meeting my brother Jake and his wife Carol at our favorite cafe to celebrate. Jake, my older brother, had always been the loud one, boisterous, confident, the kind of man who filled a room with his voice and his charm. But when I walked in and saw him hunched over the table, his shoulders stiff, and his eyes glued to the coffee cup in front of him, I knew something was wrong. Carol, on the other hand, looked radiant in her crisp white blouse, her lips painted a shade too bold for morning coffee. There was a glint in her eye that didn't match the occasion, like she knew a secret she couldn't wait to reveal. "Hey, Sarah," Jake said, his voice oddly flat. He pushed a manila envelope across the table with fingers that trembled slightly. "Just a little something for you." I smiled, expecting a housewarming card, maybe a keychain with a miniature house on it. But when I opened the envelope, my heart gave a violent lurch. Inside was a single letter on stiff, official-looking paper. At the top, the logo of a real estate company. My eyes skimmed, then froze on the words. Property sold at auction to a third party. The address was mine. The date of sale, yesterday. The cafe noise dimmed to a distant roar. My stomach twisted while creeping into my throat. I blinked at the words again, but they didn't change. My house. My savings. Gone in less than a day. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The paper trembled in my hands. Jake kept his gaze down, jaw clenched. Carol leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a smug little smile. "It's a scam, Sarah," she said smoothly as if rehearsed. "You should be more careful with your paperwork. Some people just wait for careless signatures to take advantage." My head snapped up. Scam? No, this was too precise, too targeted. My gut screamed the truth, even before the details registered. The letter referenced a power of attorney. A memory clawed to the surface. A year ago, Jake had come to me, asking for help with some paperwork for Dad's finances. He had said it was routine, just a formality. I hadn't questioned him. I trusted him. And I had signed. My pulse hammered in my ears. "You did this," I said, my voice low, dangerous. Jake finally looked at me, his eyes hard, defensive. "Don't start, Sarah. You're making it bigger than it is." Carol tilted her head, that smile never faltering. "You really should have read the fine print." Something inside me snapped. I shoved the paper back into the envelope, stood, and pushed the chair away so hard it screeched against the floor. I walked out of that cafe with tears blurring my vision, but also with a hollow pit in my chest that no amount of crying could fill. At home, I tore through my files like a woman possessed. Papers scattered across the living room floor as I searched for proof that this was all some mistake. But the truth was waiting for me, neatly tucked in a folder. There it was, power of attorney. My signature scrawled at the bottom. Legal, binding, and damning. I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling. A year ago, Jake had assured me it was just to streamline Dad's audit. I had believed him. How could I not? He was my brother. But now I saw it for what it was, the weapon he had sharpened a year in advance. I buried my head in my hands, trying to slow the avalanche of thoughts. When my phone buzzed, I ignored it. This wasn't just about money. It was resentment, festering for years, boiling over into betrayal. The next morning, I sat in a lawyer's office. She was an old family friend, someone I trusted to see reason in this chaos. She listened carefully, her expression grave as I laid out the documents and the betrayal. Finally, she sighed. "Sarah, because you signed that POA willingly, even under false pretenses, it's binding. Proving fraud requires a mountain of evidence, emails, witnesses, financial trails. Right now, it's just your word against his." My throat tightened. "So I have no case. You could file a civil suit," she said. "But it would be long, draining, and expensive. And even then, the chances aren't good." I stared at the papers in front of me, my own signature mocking me from the bottom of the form. The law, which I had always believed in, was now Jake's shield. I left her office feeling not just robbed, but utterly powerless. A week later, I was summoned to a family meeting at Mom's house. I went, desperate for some sliver of remorse from Jake, some sign of solidarity from my mother. But when I arrived, the air was thick with judgment. Jake and Carol sat smugly on the couch. Mom stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, her face cold. "You're making a scene, Sarah," she said before I could even sit down. "Your brother did what he had to do. He needed the money more than you did." I blinked at her, disbelief flooding me. "He stole my house, Mom. Everything I worked for." "It was a necessary sacrifice," she cut in sharply. "You'll understand one day." Carol's mother, Eleanor, was there too, polished, perfumed, with a cruel gleam in her eyes. She let out a laugh that made my skin crawl. "That's what happens when you're too trusting, Sarah. Honestly, you should have seen this coming." Jake avoided my eyes. Carol smirked. Mom glared at me like I was the disgrace. I sat there, frozen, the humiliation burning deeper than the betrayal itself. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I will never forget this day, and I would never forgive it. After that family meeting, I walked out of my mother's house with a numbness that quickly morphed into something else, resolve. If the law was useless and my family had turned their backs on me, then the only way forward was to rebuild myself. So I did what none of them expected. I said yes to an offer I had once considered too ambitious, a high-level position in a competitive firm in another city. It meant long hours, immense responsibility, and learning a new world from scratch, but it also meant distance. Distance from Jake, from Carol, from Mom's scolding eyes and Eleanor's mocking laughter. The first few weeks were brutal. New city, new office politics, endless paperwork. But in the chaos, I found clarity. Every late night spent in that office wasn't just work, it was training. I began reading beyond my role, devouring books on real estate law, estate planning, and financial regulations. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was sharpening weapons for a war they didn't know was coming. Life has a twisted sense of irony. A few months into my new job, I learned that my firm frequently collaborated with a philanthropic foundation run by none other than Eleanor, Carol's mother. The same woman who had laughed in my face at that family meeting now unknowingly signed off on reports that crossed my desk. At first, I froze when I saw her name, but then I realized the gift I'd been handed. She didn't recognize me as anything more than an anonymous staffer, a speck in her sprawling empire. That anonymity became my mask. I watched her carefully from the shadows. Eleanor was ruthless, yes, but obsessed with her public image. Every donation, every partnership was another brick in the wall of her reputation. And reputations, I knew, were fragile things. Meanwhile, back home, Jake and Carol's life looked glamorous on the surface. Social media was full of them sipping cocktails on a beach, posing beside a shiny new car, flashing designer clothes. But whispers reached me through Dad. Their debts hadn't disappeared, they had only been patched temporarily with the money stolen from me. And like a poorly patched roof, the leaks began to show. Carol, who had always relished luxury, pushed Jake for more. Jake, who had never been good with finances, began gambling small sums that turned into bigger losses. Behind their curated smiles, arguments simmered. I didn't need to intervene. All I had to do was wait. One evening, as I sorted through work emails, a new message pinged into my inbox. No subject line, just an attachment and a single line of text. You need to see this. I hesitated, wary of scams. But when I opened the PDF, my breath caught. It was a copy of legal documents from Dad's estate, papers Jake had tried to push through, giving himself another power of attorney. The sender's address was anonymous, but moments later, another message followed. It's me. Don't reply. Just know I'm on your side. My heart pounded. Then the signature at the bottom confirmed it. Dad's longtime business manager, a man I had known since childhood. He had grown suspicious of Jake's constant requests for access and had been quietly collecting evidence for months. I wasn't as alone as I thought. Armed with this new knowledge, I made my first move. Not against Jake directly, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I called Dad. Hey, I said gently, keeping my voice casual. I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we reviewed your finances, just to make sure everything's secure. Dad, always pragmatic, agreed. Together we sat with his lawyer and quietly tightened every loose end. Account passwords changed. New safeguards added. Jake's access was revoked without explanation. The fallout was immediate. Dad told me later that Jake had stormed into his office, demanding answers, red-faced and shouting. He couldn't understand why the accounts he once dipped into so easily were suddenly locked tight. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I just listened from afar, a silent architect tightening the screws. The long game had begun. Late at night, with only the hum of my desk lamp for company, I looked over the documents Jake had used to sell my house. I had gone over them before with my lawyer, but now that I'd been studying real estate law, I saw details differently. And then it appeared, a small but glaring flaw, a clause improperly executed during the sale. To most people it would have seemed like an insignificant technicality, but legally, it was enough to render the entire transaction voidable. I sat back, staring at the papers, heart pounding. My lawyer had missed it. Even I had missed it. But now, with my sharpened eye, I saw it clearly. It wasn't enough to win yet. Not alone. But it was the first solid thread in a tangled web. And if I pulled carefully, I could unravel everything. Months later, at one of Eleanor's charity galas, fate handed me another piece of the puzzle. I had attended only because my firm was a sponsor, blending in among the servers and junior staff. I had no intention of mingling with Eleanor's glittering circle. But then I met her granddaughter, Isabel. Unlike her grandmother, Isabel was warm, approachable, and clearly uncomfortable with the family's display of wealth. Over glasses of champagne that neither of us really wanted, we struck up a conversation. "It's exhausting," she admitted quietly, eyes scanning the room. "Everyone thinks we're untouchable. They don't see how shaky things really are." I leaned in slightly. "Shaky?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Grandmother made some bad investments. The business isn't as solid as she pretends." I masked my reaction, but inside, something flickered. Eleanor, The woman who had mocked me was standing on crumbling ground. Back home, the cracks in Jake and Carol's life widened. Their flashy lifestyle had bled their funds dry, and desperation drove them into Eleanor's arms. I wasn't there, but I heard later how the meeting went. They begged her for money, hoping that the woman who had orchestrated so much already would bail them out. Eleanor laughed in their faces, and then, in her arrogance, she revealed the truth. She admitted she had been Jake's silent partner in the real estate scam, helping to funnel the sale through her channels. Her words, meant to intimidate them, only confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Jake hadn't just betrayed me, he had been a pawn in a larger scheme. And now, they were all tangled in the same net. Isabel and I grew closer in the weeks after the gala. Over coffee in quiet corners, she confided in me the parts of her family she despised. One evening, she slid a small folder across the table. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered. Inside were documents tying Eleanor to a shell company registered in another state. Through it, she had laundered money and hidden her hand in countless shady deals, including the scam that had cost me my house. I stared at the papers, hardly daring to breathe. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy. I finally had the smoking gun. Armed with the documents, I returned to my lawyer. She spent hours cross-referencing, digging deeper, her eyes widening as the pieces fit together. "Sarah," she said at last, "this isn't just about your house. This is fraud, money laundering. If this gets out, it could bring them all down." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: hope. The game was no longer about survival. It was about justice, and I finally had the means to deliver it. My lawyer and I agreed on one thing immediately: if we moved too loudly, Eleanor would crush us with her resources before the truth saw daylight. So we filed a sealed civil lawsuit against the shell company, which legally tied back to her. It was strategic silence. No headlines, no whispers in social circles, just a quiet ticking bomb. The documents sat in the courthouse, invisible to everyone except the parties named in them. I imagined Eleanor sipping her champagne at some charity luncheon, unaware that her empire was already under siege. That thought kept me steady on nights when the fear crept in. The day Eleanor was served, the balance shifted. I wasn't there, but I could picture it. The courier arriving at her grand office, the way her sharp nails would have dug into the papers as she read her name alongside damning evidence. Within hours, the storm reached Jake and Carol. Eleanor summoned them like disobedient children. Her fury was volcanic. "Do you understand what you've done?" she hissed at them, slamming the documents onto a table. Jake stammered excuses. Carol tried to feign ignorance. But Eleanor wasn't interested in apologies. She ordered them to find out who was behind the lawsuit. Meanwhile, Jake, cornered and desperate, crawled back to Mom. He tried to get her to sign a new power of attorney, hoping to regain financial control through her. For once, even Mom refused. Maybe she finally saw what he had become. Eleanor, unwilling to sit in the shadows, hired a private investigator. It didn't take long before my name surfaced. Her arrogance blinded her. She didn't send lawyers. She called a family meeting, as though this was still a matter of private grievances. When I walked into that room, the air was suffocating. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, eyes blazing. Jake and Carol flanked her, visibly frayed. Mom stood awkwardly in the corner. "You think you're clever," Eleanor spat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "But you're playing with forces you don't understand. I will ruin you, Sarah. I will destroy your career, your reputation, everything you think you've built." I met her glare, calm as ice. "Too late," I said evenly. "The press already knows. The silence that followed was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. When the story broke, it spread like wildfire. Newspapers ran with headlines tying Eleanor's name to money laundering, fraud, and real estate scams. Reporters camped outside her office. Cameras followed her every move. Her carefully crafted image, philanthropist, businesswoman, queen of society, crumbled overnight. Partners cut ties, investors backed out, and whispers of bankruptcy echoed in her once golden circles. For years she had laughed at people like me, smaller, weaker, easier to exploit. Now she was a spectacle, her empire devoured by the very wolves she had once commanded. And as for Jake and Carol, their names weren't in headlines, but their lives collapsed in the fallout. The ripple effect hit hard. Jake lost his job when his employer caught wind of the scandal. Carol's social circle, once her fortress, shunned her completely. The luxury car was sold, the vacations ended, the laughter dried up. Eventually, they were forced into a cramped apartment with peeling paint and paper-thin walls, a far cry from the mansion lifestyle they flaunted online. And then, after months of legal wrangling, the deed to my house was restored to me. The day I stepped inside, I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. The rooms were empty, stripped bare of the dreams I had once filled them with. I had won, but at what cost? The victory was real, but it was no longer sweet. A month after the scandal erupted, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me hesitated. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Sarah." The voice on the other end cracked, weak, almost unrecognizable. It was Jake. He sounded broken. None of his old confidence, none of his arrogance. Just defeat. "Please, I need your help. Eleanor's suing us now, claiming we cost her millions. We don't have anything left. You're our only hope." I gripped the phone tighter, memories flashing. His smug face in the cafe, the envelope sliding across the table, the laughter at my humiliation. "You made your bed, Jake," I said softly, almost gently. "Now lie in it." And I hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt, just release. The court proceedings dragged on, but eventually, justice carved its mark. Eleanor was forced not only to pay restitution to me, but also to sign a legal affidavit admitting the scam. The document bore her signature, her neat handwriting beside words that stripped away her power. She had to confess in ink that the house sale was fraudulent, that her hands weren't clean. Her fortune drained away in settlements and legal fees. The woman who once stood untouchable at charity galas was reduced to selling off her assets just to stay afloat. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was the truth, in black and white, undeniable. Not long after, Mom and Dad asked to meet me. I almost said no. When I arrived, Mom's face was pale, her usual sternness softened by something I hadn't seen in years, remorse. "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I defended him when I should have defended you. I see that now." Dad, who had quietly supported me from the sidelines, placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what none of us could. You stood up to them." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to unclench just a little. I agreed to reconcile, but only on my terms. Trust wasn't automatic anymore. It had to be earned. The last time I saw Jake and Carol, they were packing boxes in my old house. The irony didn't escape me. They had stolen it from me, flaunted it, and now they were reduced to scavenging what little they could carry. Jake looked up, guilt etched deep in his features. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." Carol sneered, her bitterness spilling over. "This is all your fault. If you had just stayed quiet." I cut her off, my voice steady. "No, Carol. You used my brother, and together you both betrayed me. This," I gestured at the empty house, at their pitiful boxes, "is exactly what you deserve." I didn't wait for a reply. I told them to leave, and this time it was final. Months later, I sold the house at a profit I could never have imagined. It wasn't the home I had once dreamed of anymore. It carried too many scars, too many ghosts. Instead, I bought a modest house in a quiet rural town, far from the noise, far from betrayal. The porch overlooked rolling fields, the air smelled of fresh grass, and at night the stars painted the sky in silver. One evening, I sat on that porch with a cup of tea, the setting sun warm against my skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was at peace. I was no longer the victim. I was the victor,